Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Future Internet Billionaire. My name is Josh. I'm an entrepreneur and software developer. Today we are going to be talking about why Quibi failed. Let's dive in. There's two reasons why I think Quibi failed. They either didn't drink enough coffee or they didn't like my video. If you could please remember to hit that like button or comment down below or subscribe, it'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Let's get to it. Now, what is Quibi? Now, Quibi actually stands, it's Q-U-I-B-I, Quibi. It actually is I don't know what the legitimate term for this is, but they essentially took quick bites, and that's Quibi. They are 10-minute episodes, highly produced, production level quality type content, and 10-minute episodes meant to be consumed on the go. I like to think of Quibi as if Netflix and TikTok had a baby, that's what Quibi would be. Quibi actually announced recently that it's shutting down only 6 months after its launch, and that's what we're breaking down in this video today. What happened? Now let me give you a couple of the stats, and the shutdown becomes even more surprising when you hear about everything this startup had going for it. Quibi had raised $1 billion in seed round. That means before the product was ever launched, they raised $1 billion. They actually raised a total of $1.75 billion in investments. They had a star-studded team. They had Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was one of the founders of DreamWorks, and Meg Whitman, who was the CEO of HP, who was the CEO of eBay. I mean, we're talking about the creme de la creme of execs were the founders of this company, in addition to some of the most talented and creative individuals all throughout making up their executive team and core team members to launch this business. The business was founded actually in January 1st of 2008. It didn't launch until April 6th of 2020, over 2 years after its founding. The business officially announced that it would close on October 22nd of 20. So what happened with all of that, all the money you could raise, star-studded founders, what happened? What went wrong with Quibi? Now I'm gonna kind of break it up into different segments in the life cycle of Quibi, and we'll break down each phase to see what happened and what went wrong. Now let's talk about the pre-launch. Remember, they didn't launch until after 2 years of their founding date. In 2018, Quibi was actually called the new version of TV. This new version of TV announced that in 2018, it had raised $1 billion in seed round. That was like exploded onto the scene of the startup world. I mean, a startup that nobody's ever heard of, that's the new TV. What does new TV even mean? I mean, isn't Netflix and Hulu, isn't that new TV? What in the world? What is this thing that raised $1 billion and is essentially the new TV? Well, that's 2008, the very start, January 1st, exploded onto the scene. Some of the hype started peeling back. Who is the who's who? So I'm gonna rattle off a list, and you'll probably know some of these names here. And a lot of this comes from Jeffrey Katzenberg, who is one of the most connected and successful people in Hollywood, being a high-level executive at really key companies and also being one of the founders of DreamWorks. Some of the investors of the who's who of Hollywood said, hey, here's a check, here's some cash, let's make this new TV happen. That was Disney, NBC Universal, Sony Entertainment Group, Viacom, AT&T, Warner Media, Lionsgate, MGM, and a subsidiary called ITV and Entertainment One, which is part of Hasbro. I mean, that's the who's who, the creme de la creme, baby, of Hollywood. Now, if we go into some of the tech and VC investors, in addition to all of the investors that came from the Hollywood scene, we actually see the Alibaba Group is one of the major investors. They have their own production in cinema. Think like Amazon's kind of Amazon Prime and all their original content. Alibaba has the same thing, so they put some money into this new TV. Madrone Capital Partners, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Liberty Global, the Katzenberg founded Wonderco. So he actually has his own investment and venture vehicle that he is one of the founders of, and they were a big investor. In addition to Jeffrey Katzenberg himself and May Whiteman, they also put some of their own money in it. Obviously, they're very highly successful people worth millions and millions of dollars, and they were also investors. What I would like to point out is that that's about as amazing of an investment and advisory group that you could possibly put together for this thing called New TV. This is pre-launch. So what you're starting to see is they're putting all of the layers that you would need to be successful, right, on the cake, right? They are just piling it on. Star-studded executive team, all of the who's who of investors, right? Raising money is one thing, but raising money from very strategic partners is a whole nother thing. People that really know the industry inside and out and are very capable of being a strategic source for you, whether that's in resources, talent, finances, industry know-how, whatever it is. I mean, these were the people you would want on your board. Now, 1 month after they had raised this $1 billion in seed money, 1 month before they launched, 1 month right before March of 2020, they raised an additional 750. That's what brought their $1.7 billion total to the 1.75 billion in seed, and 1 month before launch, they raised an additional 750 million. Here's the interesting thing. I don't know what the projections or anything of this company look like internally, but they said with this new round of funding, they would actually be able to achieve profitability. That was all the money they would need to grow past the startup to be profitable. Interesting, right? I mean, you would think with $1.75 billion that would be enough to take it to profitability. And they thought so as well. They're like, man, we got more than enough capital to make it, because when we launch, remember, 1 month before launch, he's like, we're popping off. This thing is going to be the next Netflix. Now, what we have to break down a little bit is in this pre-launch phase, remember, there was 2 years, over 2 years before they launched, is where did all this money go? If you raised $1.75 billion, where did all the money go? Because if you look at their entire lifetime as a company, that's a budget of about $48 million a month. That's like some stupid cash. That's some serious money. Well, in the first year that they, or really in that first pre-launch phase, not the first year, it was 2 years, the first pre-launch phase, they spent $1.1 billion on content. They were spending, if you kind of break that down, they were spending about 100 grand per minute on this produced content and about $6 million per episode based on online resources. So if you see, that's a lot of money. So you can understand why they had to raise so much money, because again, it's not like TikTok where it's user generated content. Your neighbor, your little sister, your mom, your grandma could just be on there creating funny content. This was production level quality where you had also very high profile actors and actresses in these short films. So there was by no means any conservation in terms of cost. They were going for the best produced, creative, great content that you could possibly want on a platform. That's where a lot of the majority of that money went. They also, in that pre-launch phase, spent $150 million on marketing. That's a lot of money on marketing, like a lot. So again, it's a small drop in the bucket for people like Coca-Cola, but when you're talking about a startup, a new startup that hasn't even launched, to spend $150 million on marketing is a lot of money. So they also spent $150 million on marketing. They did everything from, I remember before pre-launch, I don't know if anybody else saw it, but you get ads on everything from Spotify to Facebook to your AdSense on when you would visit web pages. And they also did crazy cool things like a Super Bowl ad, a really creative Super Bowl ad. And I think Super Bowl ad goes for like $1 million a minute or something like that.
Where's the car? Greg, where are you? I'll be there in a Quibi.
So they were really going all out. They wanted this thing to pop off, really garner the attention and grow to millions of subscribers within the first year, which is we'll get into. And that's why they spent big. They had spent all this money on content, so they also needed to spend big to get the users there to make all that investment worth it. Based on that, you can see a little bit where they spent their money. Obviously, they spent it on team and facilities and all this other stuff, but the highest level expenses with content production and marketing. Let's fast forward now to launch day. We're at a pre-launch phase. Everything's getting ready. They're all rah, amazing content shows. We spent $1.1 billion on content and $150 million on marketing. Our waiting list is huge. What happens? Now, let's launch. So April rolls around. April 6th was their official launch date. April rolls around, and bada bing, bada boom, they launch, and it actually pops off pretty well in the first day. Once it popped off in the first day, within the first 3 days of launch, 910,000 people signed up for their new service, which included a 3-month free trial. That's a significant trial. And then the reason why we do the 3 days is because that's when they kind of killed that offer for the initial launch to draw people in. But 910,000 signed up from that first kind of 3-day launch period. That's amazing. That's actually really great growth. So that 150 million was starting to kind of come into play. All the hype, all the attention was actually bringing people in. 910,000 is not where it stopped. That wasn't the total number of Quibi downloads. Now, Quibi was all focused on mobile app, right? Like, it was a service built for the mobile phone. It wasn't like a Netflix where you're pulling it up on Apple TV or your Amazon Fire Stick or Heroku. You were pulling that bad boy up on your phone. It was content made for the phone, for vertical and horizontal, right? So you were looking at the downloads for the success of who was using the tool. It was actually based on data from Apptopia. There was 12.5 million downloads in total for Quibi's like 6-month launch period. Right? So that's a lot of people that downloaded that 12.5 million. Again, that's what you get when you spend 150 million on marketing. It's pretty incredible. Obviously, anybody that builds apps or software knows that just because somebody downloads your app doesn't actually mean that they're active users. Well, based on released information from Quibi and reports, they said that out of the 12.5 million users, or downloads, what I should say, 1.3 million of them were active. So active, monthly active users, right? So that means that they were actually using the app on a monthly basis. During this phase, as you can see, with all the money raised, the star-studded team, the hyped backers, Quibi, even after launch, became one of the startups to watch for 2020. It became the darling startup, the rising star that people were talking about. They were showing up on the top 2020 startup list. They were getting all this hype and excitement. It was, for real, what looked like at the time the next multi-billion-dollar Netflix company. Nobody would have ever thought the ending that was coming. Like, you would have never actually been able to imagine that, because everything that you were hearing, everything that you were seeing was pointing to fantastic success. So at this point, we'll recap real quick. Star-studded team, the best team you could possibly hope or want. The company has more money than you could ever imagine, $1.75 billion. Again, as I mentioned before, it's a $48 million budget per month. They have really the who's who as advisors and investors in their company. They have the hype, they have the attention, and now they have 12.5 million app downloads. That's where we're at so far. So that's why you can see they were so beloved and that everybody thought they were going to be the next big thing. But wait, trouble was in the air. Now, a few months after launch, there was blood starting to be smelled in the water, and that the founding team and the company started to recognize something that cannot be avoided by any startup on the planet. 2 months after their launch, Quibi started noticing that they were greatly underperforming relative to the amount of money invested in content and marketing thus far. Out of that 910,000 people that initially signed up, Sensor Tower, who is an apps reporting and data tool, reported that out of the 910,000 people that signed up on launch day, only 72,000 of them stuck around to actually become subscribers. Now, that's a pretty significant number, but that's only about an 8% conversion rate from sign up to paid subscriber. And as everybody knows, my major theme is the only value of a business is its ability to actually generate revenue. So they were only able to convert about 8% of that early sign-up group to paid users. Now in June, 3 months after launch, Sensor Tower reported that at this pace, they were continuing to grow. Remember, that was only out of the 910,000 sign up on that first 3-day launch that 8% converted. But Sensor Tower also reported that Quibi was on track to grow to about 2 million paid subscribers by the end of 2020. So they were still growing. It didn't stop. They were actually still growing. So based on that data and the projections, you can see that Quibi 2 million subscribers, even if they were only paying the smallest plan. Quibi had two plans, a $4.99 plan a month with ads or a $7.99 plan per month without ads. That even if the 2 million subscribers from Quibi were all on the smallest plan, that Quibi would be on track to do about $10 million monthly, or they would achieve an annual run rate for 2021 if they didn't grow anymore to $120 million a year. That is huge. $10 million a month and $120 million a year is a significant business. I mean, for real, like that's a big time, big deal. So why in the world were they actually noticing trouble in the air and coming to the realization that, oh crap, even though we're going to achieve $2 million at the end of the year, we're greatly underperforming compared to what we spent. And if you look at what Quibi projecting and what they sold the dream on, the first year pop was actually supposed to be much, much larger. Quibi projected that by the end of year one, they were actually going to be at 7.2 million subscribers. So when you look at that compared to 2 million, which they were actually on track to do, you can see it's not even 50% of the growth that they were actually trying to achieve. I mean, it's like just around kind of that 25% mark. So you can see that that's where that underperforming started to become recognized as that, oh crap, even though to anybody else 2 million subscribers, 10 million a month and $100 million to $120 million a year is a lot, they needed to be at 36 million a month and about $436 million a year, not 120. $436 million a year. Again, that's if everybody's on their lowest plan. They were obviously hoping that people would be more on like the $7.99 ad free, which would put them well over the $700 million a year mark. That's where they noticed that they were greatly underperforming. It didn't matter what level of success they had achieved, even in the hundreds of millions in potential revenue. It was way too low compared to where they needed to be, which was probably somewhere between the $500 and $1 billion in revenue per year after that first year. So let's bring it forward now to October. Based on their growth, based on what they're, let's bring it forward now to October. We saw pre-launch, we started the launch, and even with great success, we begun noticing trouble and blood in the water, and the founding team's radar started going off saying, oh crap, we raised all this money, we made all these assumptions, what now? So what they ended up coming to the conclusion of was in October 22nd, even with the success that they had achieved, it wasn't enough, and in October they decided we're shutting the company down. They're shutting down a company that had potential of $10 million a month and $120 million in revenue. As an entrepreneur, that makes me sad, because that's a lot of money. That's a real lot of money. But at their scale and what they were trying to do, I understand it wasn't enough. And so let's kind of dive into the shutdown and what happened there. When they announced that they were shutting down this once beloved superstar startup that was going to be the next multi-billion dollar, maybe even up into the hundreds of billions of dollars value like Netflix, is shutting down, it wrecked the internet. Especially, well, the startup world, tech internet. They said, what? How in the world could this possibly happen? Now, there are a number of reasons why a startup could shut down, and I'm sure Quibi is the victim of not just one individual reason, but many. Some of the reasons that people mentioned, and I don't agree with all of these, but based on all of the stuff out there, people mentioned that Quibi shut down because it was meant to be a on-the-go consumption platform that essentially people could watch when they're on the train, they're waiting in line, they're going to the bathroom while they're at work, just again, 10-minute episodes that you can consume on the go. But due to COVID and the national lockdown, nobody was on the go anymore. Another reason people have mentioned is that there was no real breakout content. The content was great, but it didn't ever really catch mainstream media or attention, even though it was able to win 2, I think it was Emmy Awards. It was able to garner 2 pretty significant valued accolades for its content, but you didn't really hear much about the content online. So this has been touted as one of the reasons why it could have actually been a failure. Another reason why is that this short form video that they were trying to compete in had infinite free competition. So if you wanted to watch Quibi, it would cost you at minimum $5 a month. And then on the high end, $8 a month. But when you're looking at short form content, you're thinking of YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat. There's a lot of other consumption sources out there for quick content. So Quibi wasn't the only one. They were really one of the only paid short form content platforms with an ocean of free options. So that has been one of the reasons why people said that they could have been a failure. Now, Quibi actually released a statement that they said their standalone app with the content that it had didn't actually have enough value in and of itself to justify a standalone platform. So you can see that there's a lot of assumption out there about what happened to this company. I mean, with everything that it had going for it, how could it unfold so quickly, only 6 months after its founding? I mean, that is such a short lifetime for a business. How did it unfold so quickly? Even Quibi's CEO, Meg White, mentioned that everything they tried for whatever reason, that's kind of vague, didn't work. And what that makes me think is even the CEO herself, she looked at everything. Now, she's an incredible executive. She's not dumb or somebody that you would think was like, well, you know, they didn't have any experience. She had all the experience. But even she couldn't really fully understand why the company didn't take off the way they expected. It had all the right ingredients. Now, that was in a CNBC interview with her and Jeffrey Katzenberg. And even Jeffrey Katzenberg went on to say, you know, either we just didn't have as good a content as we believed. We didn't really achieve that product market fit. He said maybe we tried to charge too early in the value chain and people didn't fully understand the value or appreciate the content for what it would cost. And then he also believes, you know, he agrees with the fact that it was designed for people on the go, and due to COVID, nobody's really on the go anymore, but he doesn't equate the failure entirely to that. And you would actually think that if we look at the world we live in, it's pretty crazy with COVID and all the lockdowns, that in this time, that even though people were saying, oh, well, it was an app and a content tool designed to be consumed on the go, that's why it failed. But that's really not true, because if you think about any mobile kind of consumption tool, they're all designed to be on the go, right? Like there's anything that's built for a mobile phone could be consumed on the go. And if you look at other popular streaming services like Disney Plus and Hulu, or even some of the competitors like YouTube or TikTok or Snap, they all exploded during COVID time because people didn't have anything else to do besides consume content. So instead of that being looked at as the reason for negative, actually, if anything, it would have helped. I truly believe it would have helped Quibi succeed. So that's an indicator that there was something else missing, that it really wasn't COVID that shut that business down. One thing I would like to know when we're kind of talking about what the founders said could be the failure, what we said the media said could be the failure, the founders in these interviews really owned up to their failure. So all I can say is I have mad respect for you all being such accomplished executives. A failure, a big one like this, is hard to swallow, but they have owned up to it, they admitted it, and they did everything they could to make it right with their investors and everybody that was involved. So all I could say is I have great respect for you. Failure obviously is not going to define them. They're going to go on to continue to do great things as they've done in the past. So I just wanted to say it was really cool, even in the face of failure, how they owned up to it all. So I gave you a lot of information, but as an entrepreneur in the tech space myself, I wanted to give my gut reason why I believe that Quibi shut down. Based on everything I've seen in the startup world and based on all the research, here's what I could surmise. Quibi ultimately shut down because it didn't have a product market fit. It really just didn't have, and when I say product market fit, they weren't delivering enough value, solving a big enough problem for people that people were willing to pay for in a significant way, or become subscribers that would help Quibi succeed on the level that it was. It had solved a problem for a lot of people. I mean, we're talking, it was on track to 2 million subscribers, but it wasn't big enough for what they needed. So they were really in a place where in that 6-month period, they didn't, in the product that they had built over 2 years, didn't really have a big enough market for the scale that they were trying to achieve. And that's a good indicator of a product market fit problem. I think the second one is they underestimated their competition. Granted, there was no short form premium production level content besides like Netflix, but it really is built for big screens and things like that. There wasn't really a Quibi competitor exactly like Quibi, but there were a lot of competitors. I like to think of them as parallel competitors or similar competitors that actually competed for people's attention and time. That's what Quibi was competing for, was attention and time with content. And because of TikTok and Snap and all the other mobile consumption platforms that were free and had so much content that you honestly could never consume it all, Quibi underestimated their competition. I think that's another real reason why they didn't assess and estimate that, man, we're competing with TikTok, which is free. Why would people pay for our tool? Is it really that good enough? Do we have enough there to compete with a free tool that has millions of user-generated videos? And I think number 3, they had an extremely expensive business model. Like I told you, we're on track to do $2 million a year. $120 million in revenue would have been just the starting revenue point for them going into 2021. That's incredible. But their business model was so expensive. As you can see, they had $1.1 billion in content production costs and $750 million in additional funding that they had to use for advertising and costs. And they believed that 1.75 billion was going to take them to profitability. But that would have only been in addition to the additional between $500 and $1 billion in actual revenue from users on top of that funding that would have got them there. But since they didn't achieve that goal of that growth and be able to make up that additional revenue on top of what they raised, there was no way that they could have afforded to keep their model going unless they would go out and raise another billion or $750 million from investors. It was just too expensive to keep that model going. And because of how expensive it was, they couldn't afford or sustain a pivot. Again, with a pivot saying like maybe it was just a pivot in the way that they would actually monetize their content, going to a revenue-based or an advertising-based model instead of a subscription-based model. They couldn't afford to make that move because they had invested so much money and so much time in creating this service that even 6 more months, they would have run out of money and had to go raise more money. But based on their projections, I honestly don't know if they would have been able to raise more money. So the model was so expensive that they couldn't pivot it and they couldn't sustain it without raising more money or achieving the revenue growth that they obviously fell way short on. As you can see, even with a star-studded team and all of the resources that you could ever imagine for a startup, there's no way to force product market fit. There's no way to compete in a world that you haven't actually built enough value to prompt people to exchange their hard-earned dollars for your service. You can't force it, no matter how amazing your team is, no matter how much publicity you get, no matter how much money you raise. You either have product market fit and have a solution that people are willing to pay for, or you don't. And Quibi is an exact example about they had all the right stuff except for the most important thing, a service that and a solution to a problem that was big enough that they could actually build a business on. The market will always determine your business. You can't fight it, you have to adapt to it. Quibi couldn't because it was too expensive, so that's why they had to shut down. But you have to adapt to it and embrace it. I've had to shut down businesses, not Quibi level where it's billions of dollars, but to me it was significant money, so I understand the pain and I can relate. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I hope you all enjoyed this breakdown. Don't fall into the same traps that Quibi did, and as you can see, the most important thing you have to figure out in the early days, no matter if you're Quibi with all of the right stuff or you're just one or two people in a garage starting a business, you have to find a real problem that you can solve that people are willing to pay for and at the scale that you need them to do it at. I just want to say again, if you could like my video or comment down below what you think and subscribe, that would mean so much to me. I would really appreciate it. It really helps me out as the host of this channel. It really lets me know that you enjoy the content. Other than that, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to watch this video. God bless you all, and I'll see you on the next one.